organizations like the Environmental Defense Fund, net zero in the context of the gas industry really means two things: net CO2 and net methane emissions.
In the 30 years I worked in TÜGA, I've seen very large investment programs, and it was always about detection and repair and not about scientific quantification. We just did it. We understand that this has changed fundamentally and that a deep understanding of all emission sources is crucial. Equally important is the increase of the injection of renewable and decarbonized gases into the grid to reduce the methane emissions step by step. And we share best practices with the other DSOs in the distribution committee in Eurogas to find new ways of LDAR. But without the support of the Ministry and the NRA, further reductions can't be implemented.
European governments have a unique opportunity to really require disclosure of methane performance across the EU's gas supply chain. In the future, we anticipate that companies who will make CO2 and methane emissions neutrality as a core part of their business will be the companies that will deliver the highest value, both for their shareholders but also for the planet.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here today to our EU Methane Strategy, What Does It Mean for Gas event. And I'm also very delighted to say that Eurogas today has a very valuable partner, and that is Wintershall Dea. So this is our first collaboration with Wintershall Dea in the realm of events. And it's been very successful so far in that we've had about 500 registrants. So this is clearly a very important issue for many people, for many of the people across Europe, for many policymakers, for journalists, and of course, for the industry. And today we will be looking very much at what the industry is doing, what the industry should or could do, and what the European Commission and other policymakers expect of European industry, and what we can actually do that's technologically available to reduce methane emissions. Of course, the sustainability of gas is of great importance for the European Union. As we drive towards carbon neutrality in 2050, we will need all of the vectors that we currently use for energy to actually decarbonize and to reduce GHG emissions. Methane is a notable one, and indeed, there is a strong undertaking by industry to address the issue. It is actually very important for us to say that, of course, the industry takes the situation very seriously. And as Eurogas, we have indeed joined many initiatives to tackle methane emissions. We work very closely with our members and with many other stakeholders to find the right ways to reduce methane emissions to improve the long-term sustainability of gas. Well, it's my great pleasure to be here today to introduce you to everybody who is taking part. But I'd also like to bring our partner in, Thilo Wieland, who is a member of the board at Wintershall Dea, to also give a brief introductory speech to talk a little bit about what Wintershall are doing and what Wintershall are going to be able to express to us during this wonderful event. Thilo.
Yeah, James, thanks a lot for the very kind words. And I will not talk too much about Wintershall Dea already, but first of all, welcome to all the participants and really thanks for joining us today. I think the large number of attendees, and I think it's more than 230, still rising, is actually proof that effectively tackling methane emissions is really a highly important topic. And I think we as an industry have committed ourselves to reducing emissions as far as possible, and we take that really very seriously. You see that by many initiatives. One is that we as an industry have also created the methane guiding principles from the industry, where we actually want to help the industry in actively reducing emissions and anchoring emission awareness in corporate identities. And I think we will come to that discussion later on. I also think that today's policy session bears witness to our strong commitment, and so do the policy proposals that we have made for the European Commission in May to address the topics of methane emissions in Europe. So I'm very glad that the Commission recognizes that commitment, and the EU Methane Strategy, to me, and I think that's also true for the industry, is a big step in the right direction. The industry is ready to actively contribute, and I think part of that is what we have here today. And I'm really looking forward to a highly interesting discussion with such a broad audience, and want to thank all participants for joining us today. Real pleasure and looking forward to that discussion. Back to you, James.
Thank you, Thilo. It is a great pleasure to run this event with you, and thanks for the great support in reaching out to lots of people to help them join us today. I will just finish my introduction by saying, indeed, it's not just about the industrial commitments that we have. One of the main reasons we have this event today is, of course, that the European Commission brought out its methane strategy earlier this year, well, about a month ago. And so I think it's important for us all to understand exactly the directions that we see that the policymakers want to take on this topic. It is a very comprehensive strategy covering agriculture, waste, as well as energy. And so I think that it's very fortunate that we also have one of the leading authorities from the European Commission with us today. But enough of my introduction. The time is passing and we must move on to discussion. And well, we've got no one better really than you could imagine to lead such a discussion today. And I'm delighted to say that Adam Hawkes has agreed to join us. Adam is the director of the Sustainable Gas Institute at the Imperial College of London. And today, Adam will be your moderator and will take you through and put all of our panelists through their paces, which is something that I'm sure he'll enjoy and they'll do their best to keep up with. And I must say thank you, Adam, for joining us. And I hand over to you and wish you a very good panel discussion. Thank you.
Superb. Thank you very much, James. And just to add my welcome to that of James and Thilo. So welcome to this event, a very timely event on discussion on the EU methane strategy. It's a particularly interesting strategy, potentially leading to regulation and all kinds of other activities in Europe over the next period. So an exciting time for methane, an exciting time for sustainable gas. And I hope that this panel session gives us more insights to the various viewpoints on that strategy and well, the opportunities and challenges that it may bring the industry and all other stakeholders alike. As we know, methane is an industry-wide issue. It's no point one company doing a lot of activity on methane emissions. You really need action across supply chains. It needs to be effective, it needs to be well reported, it needs to be transparent. And I hope the methane strategy heads in this direction. But enough from me. What I want to do today, being your moderator, is to introduce our panelists and invite each of them to give just a short introduction of about 5 minutes each on their views on the methane strategy. I'm going to introduce the panelists one by one. So starting off with our representation from the EU, we have Malcolm Mcdowell. So Malcolm has been working with the Commission for quite some time, about a decade in DG Energy. And he is the team leader responsible for the methane strategy. So we very much look forward to the overview and view from Malcolm. Please, over to you, Malcolm.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yes, got you, Malcolm.
Yes. Good, great. Well, yes, a little bit about this strategy, which is the focus of today's discussion. I came in to work on this strategy during the course of the finalization, the preparation for the publication of the communication, which set very much indeed the course that we think in the Commission should be taken in order to make good on this realization that methane needs to be tackled, and not just generally as part of the other greenhouse gases that the Commission has already put forward a great deal of legislation on to tackle, but specifically in a number of very focused initiatives, and even go as far as propose legislation to tackle methane emissions in the EU. I'm told that it was a long awaited full methane strategy, that there was a great deal of anticipation from the parts of legislators, co-legislators, as well as industry. I think for the gas industry in particular, there is this recognition that there is indeed a need perhaps to formalize the process a little bit to ensure that all industry plays a role, not just the ones that are willing to do it, and that they do it in a way which is uniform and which ensures that real commitments are backed by real actions. There's a great deal of enthusiasm that I feel for industry to come forward with the right kind of strategy. And and in looking closely not only at what the industry has delivered in response to public consultation on this strategy, but also other stakeholders, the impression that I have is that there is an agreement in terms of what the priorities should be. And I think that we have done our best to deliver those. And there is agreement also from the side of the Commission in terms of those priorities. So first of all, there is the record. Another thing that I want to say before going into a little bit more in terms of detail is that the focus of this strategy, perhaps unusually for a lot of the EU's communications, is not just the EU. It goes much broader than that. There is this recognition early on that it no longer makes sense to talk about effectively tackling greenhouse gas emissions of any sort by taking a purely EU approach and focusing only on what we could be doing in the EU. So from the outset, we make it clear that whatever legislation or initiatives we want to be putting forward in the EU needs to be developed, needs to be put through together with a great deal of work and effort at the international level. And it's not just a work and effort that we will need to be involved in order to come to a proper achievement and results on this. But I think that all stakeholders also need to be actively involved in. So in a few words, what have we put, what have we delivered with this communication, which will be further defined together with upcoming policy proposals in the EU. Well, first, those policy proposals, which are focused on first and foremost ensuring that we have the right information with regards to methane emissions. And as was said earlier on, it's not just about the energy sector, it's also recognizing that methane emissions are coming from other sectors like the waste and the agricultural sector. And therefore the recognition that we need to bring that clarity together in those other sectors too. The energy sector has delivered in terms of voluntary initiatives, and we think that we're very supportive of them. The Commission will be one of the signing parties to GMP 2.0, but we feel, and I think many agree, that we need to go further than just continuing to support such voluntary initiatives, but to ensure that the oil and gas industry is put on an equal footing. We've decided to put forward MRV legislation in the EU, building on what the OGMP, the CCS's OGMP has delivered. And further than, and on top of that, we've also recognized that what needs to be done in terms of mitigation is to focus legislation on leakage detection and repairs. There's a great deal of information out there that reveals that this is a low-cost option for the energy industry to focus on, and there's a great deal of agreement that one of the short-term measures should be focusing on leakage detection and repairs. Furthermore, we feel that another low-cost option, another option which we think in the energy sector needs to be focused on with the possibility for legislation is also the attempt to eliminate unavoidable venting and flaring. And these are the main measures that we will be focusing along the course of the months to come, in order to be able to bring the Commission's proposals to the co-legislators on this during the course of 2021. Exactly when that will happen is not completely clear yet, although the work program is announced June 2021, which we think is perhaps a bit early, but it will be certainly during the course of 2021. And then just a last word to emphasize the fact that along with these initiatives, which will be the core of our focus for the coming months, we wish to work with our international partners. We're already very much involved in the CCAC in UNEP, and we're bringing IEA on board. IEA has done a lot of work on information on methane mitigation and on informing on the policy actions around the world. We want the IEA also to be brought on board in order to see what can be done at a global level, with a view eventually, first of all, to consider putting together some kind of an international methane observatory, because we feel that monitoring, reporting, and LDAR is not sufficient. There needs to be verification, and again, it needs to be done, we think, on a global level. So why not start already with a global level from the start, with a view eventually also for that observatory to perhaps develop a tool which we think would be very useful to put all supplies on an even keel, by developing some methane supply index, which would very much increase the sort of information that what one could glean in terms of the methane mitigation efforts that have been taken in various parts of the world. We feel that as the largest gas importer in the world, and other countries, important gas importers, and as well as producers, have committed already to efforts on methane mitigation, that there is scope for a great deal of ambition at the international level. We will push for that in our unilateral, multilateral relationships. And methane will be, in a way, mainstreamed, I think, in all our conversations with our energy partners. We believe that the time is ripe for that, and that we have enough information, even though the technology is developing, and soon in the coming years, especially with the EU satellite capabilities, we'll have even more information that will allow us to verify the information we'll be getting from the level of companies, and to be able to give us a solid grounding for having not only a good view of where the methane emissions are happening, but also in terms of what actions need to be carried out in order to achieve mitigation. I'll leave it at that. I've probably gone over 5 minutes by 2 or 3 times, and I apologize for that. But there's a lot more in that communication which I haven't covered. But this will be enough for now, I think.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. And no problem to go a bit over there. I think it's very, very important to have this context setting of the EU methane strategy right up front in this discussion. But we'll move right along to Thilo Weyland. He's already spoken as an introduction, but just a brief further introduction is industrial engineering and business management background, on the board of Wintershall since 2015, with various responsibilities across exploration, production, and transport transmission of gas. A huge range of industrial experience there. Over to you, Thilo.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Adam, for the kind introduction. Yeah, just picking up on what Malcolm has just said, I mean, reducing emissions is really essential to reaching Europe's ambitious climate targets. And we as Wintershall Dea, we are fully obliged to these targets, both the Paris Agreement, but also the European Green Deal. And we believe that the clean, flexible, and reliable source of energy that natural gas can deliver across all the sectors effectively contributes really to reaching the climate targets. And I think that is something that we have not just started with that strategy coming from the EU, but we also as an industry, we have already a track record where we did improve already. Just as an example, from 1990 to 2017 in Germany, we have in our sector reduced actually the methane emissions by 40%. So it is an ongoing process, and it also requires the necessary technology. The EU methane strategy, I don't want to jump into details here because Malcolm has done that very nicely. I think it's, as I said in the introduction, to me, it's really the right step that we take here. Also the measures, and maybe we can discuss that later on a bit more in detail. But we also appreciate very much the widespread adoption of the measurement and reporting framework that was actually developed under the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership, OGMP, where we, Wintershall Dea, also have decided to join that OGMP 2.0 initiative. Let me give you maybe 1 or 2 examples that we really as an industry are already working on certain topics. One example is that on our platforms in the Netherlands, we are actually preparing for the deployment of new technologies to further reduce our methane emissions. What we do there is actually a pigging station will be used differently, and we will avoid venting of gas and instead make use of that for power generation. And another example is in Argentina, where we do actually pipe associated gas from an oil production to a neighboring facility. So that also shows that the industry is really working together and trying to find solutions. We as Wintershall, we have quite a good, let's say, starting point. We are only at about 50% of the IOGP average for gas intensity. So that is, it's a good starting point, but no reason to rest actually, but rather to further develop that one. And that is also a point that is important to us, and where today's event is so important. With the Methane Guiding Principles initiative, we have actually committed ourselves that we want to bring these topics and we want to educate the industry and also partners. And therefore, I think these kind of executive and master classes that we had today to share actually knowledge and to exchange our experiences is very important. And let me, as a closing remark, saying something from the perspective of a producer, and I think Malcolm has touched that already quite nicely. It is not enough just to talk about that issue in a European perspective. We feel actually obliged to bring that topic to all the countries where we are active, especially to the national oil companies. And we would do that both ways. I mean, it's not actually that we can just force them into something. I think it's about convincing, leading by example and bringing actually technologies to the countries. That will definitely help. And I think here also support from the European Union would be important with bilateral discussions with gas producing countries actually to bring that forward. With respect to cost, Malcolm, here I have to, there we probably have a discussion. Not all the actions are actually cost neutral. And I think that is something where we need to find a good way, because as of now, low-hanging fruits have already been tackled. I think to make the next step, there will be investments needed where we are also willing to do that. But I think it's also important that there's a regulatory recognition of these reduction efforts in order to really give a level playing field looking forward. But in a nutshell, industry, I think, is ready and is actively contributing to go forward.
Thank you very much, Thilo, for the industry perspective. And yes, we work with a lot of different industries, see action across various industries, which is good to see. But just before I move to the next panelist, I just want to point out to all of our participants, we currently have more than 300 people online. But immediately after the panel presentations, there's going to be a Q&A opportunity for discussion on these topics. So please do feel free to post your questions in a Q&A box, which you should find either at the bottom of the screen or somewhere in whatever device you're looking at to view the session. So don't be shy, please just post your questions there and we'll come and select some of them towards the end. So moving on to our next panelist, this is Eva Hennig. So Eva comes from a background in mechanical engineering in Munich. She's been working with TÜGE for quite some time. TÜGE is obviously an alliance of a large number of utilities, some of which are gas, and she has an interest in various aspects of that, including sectoral coupling and distribution of renewable gases, and of course, methane. So over to you, Eva.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm coming from TÜGE, which is a group of 100 utility companies. We are quite old. We are 150 years old. And so we have a long-term experience with ELDR, not with quantification. This is one of the topics, but definitely we've always done ELDR. And we take the topic very seriously from the management down to the technicians in the trenches. We are involved in many associations in Germany, but what we also do within the TÜGE group, and you can imagine if you have so many DSOs, we share best practices on the operational level, and we try to identify the most relevant and the most cost-efficient ways to reduce the methane emissions through operations. Since 1990, the leaks in Germany have been reduced by 90%. Which is a big step, and this came from the large investment programs to reduce the older steel pipes and the cast iron pipes. And this is why today we have a very high percentage of polyethylene, which is very tight, and which also has the great advantage that you can transport 100% of hydrogen within it. So it's on both ways, it's very good. To quantify the emissions, which is one of the big topics that we have in front of us, the German Gas Association, our technical association, has set up a measurement program, which we joined as TÜGA, and also with some of our companies. And the specialty is that you measure the emissions right on the site, so the pipe is still in the ground. And that way, we want to have a better experience on what kind of volumes we have, depending on pressure, material, and diameters. And we already have 75 measurements, and it's continuing. On the European side, you know, I have two hats. So the one head is being the head of the distribution committee in Eurogas, and the other one being operational in TÜGA. On the European side, we have a very, very good cooperation between the DSOs. It's like a big family. And also on the European sector, we share the best practices. And you know that ALDAR is national rules, and everybody has different national rules and different experiences. But this helps a lot for the future to understand what can you do as a next step. Looking at the Methane Strategy, this is why, as we're coming from the ALDAR, this is for us, it's nothing unusual. So I think we are not afraid of this. So this is a very good step forward. We are very happy that the Commission has taken up the topic of agricultural waste and waste management, and also the wastewater treatment, so that we can in the future also include the injection of biomethane and other biogases from the other plants into the grid, which is reducing operational methane emissions, but which is also giving us a way to decarbonize the gas grid. So I think this is a very good step forward, and we hope that also funds will go into the operation of those plants, which are local farmer plants. We are advocating very much to inject those gases directly at the local level into the distribution grid, because this is helping very much to increase the decarbonization. What we also see very positive is the call in the Methane Strategy for the regulators, because as you know, the DSOs, as the TSOs, are regulated entities, which means we cannot just ramp up our investment and our OPEX. We are regulated entities with regulated tariffs. And so the close cooperation with the regulators is important for us to find cost-efficient ways. It's always to stop top down, take the first step, which is bringing the most methane reduction at the least cost. And to do this together with the regulators, so in the future, these costs can also be included in the tariffs. So all in all, I think in the last 12 months, a lot has happened. We had for the first 7 months this year, we had a task force to bring us into the OGMP. You know, the OGMP will be extended to midstream and downstream. We have worked intensively with a larger group of companies to prepare a document, an Excel file where you can report all the different kind of emissions. It was a good work together because that way you really pinned it and said, okay, where do we have the emissions and what are the ways in the future how to measure them and how to report them. So it's a very, very positive movement. Just as Tilo has said, it's the gas industry. I would say everybody's very active in it, and we have many, many discussions in the house, and people come and say, I have an idea and I have an idea, and we just have to collect them and bring them then into the operations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eva. Great. Okay, let's move on to our final panelists. So just before that, so just to remind everyone, please do put questions in the Q&A. So it's a unique opportunity to ask these 4 individuals questions on the EU methane strategy. So please don't be shy. But okay, moving on to our final panelists is Poppy Callessie. So Poppy leads the Environmental Defence Fund's energy program in Europe with a focus on delivering EU policies to contribute to deep reductions in global oil and gas methane emissions by 2025. She has a background across the European Commission, European Parliament, and Statoil, Norwegian Ocean Industries roles. So great wealth of experience to bring to that topic. Over to you, Poppy.
Thank you very much, Adam, and thank you to all the speakers for Yeah, very encouraging remarks so far. I would like to bring the angle of considering the methane emissions as an import strategy. So as we all know so far, there is no evidence that the EU's second phase of deep decarbonization will be met by domestic energy sources alone. And so with that, the EU will still have to rely on imports. And in a European Green Deal context, I think an import strategy should mean clean energy imports. So in this context, the methane strategy is a great first step in the right direction. And as hearing what Malcolm just told us at the beginning of the session, it just becomes better by the week. So it acknowledges the scale of the damage methane is causing in a 2030 context, and it also acknowledges the socioeconomic benefits of solving it. However, the current policy framing is that of methane as a pollutant rather than as a societal and geopolitical issue, undermining the welfare of future generations both in Europe and globally. So to deliver on the societal and geopolitical aspects of the issue, I think that the legislative proposals due in June 2021 and later at the end of 2021 should give a clearer sense of direction in terms of both the emissions the EU intends to reduce. So Malcolm told us today that it's not only going to be the domestic emissions, but the initiatives are going to be looking across the EU's gas supply chain, which is hugely important and encouraging. And of course, we collectively as stakeholders, I think we'll need to start thinking what this means in terms of a cleaner energy import strategy, informed by the societal and market readiness to take up cleaner energy carriers. So far, following up the publication of the methane strategy, I think the good news is that the strategy itself has inspired some suppliers to the EU to take notes and engage with the issue. The bad news is that many of those suppliers are not prepared to act with ambition and urgency until they experience a material market risk to their profitability. So considering how long the EU legislative process can be and how fast both science and technology are moving, our view is that setting the framework for action on imports as this becomes technologically and scientifically feasible is a no-regret option. So instead of thinking of regulation as something static and set in stone, we believe that this begs for a more dynamic view of regulation, for more dynamic regulation. And I was very encouraged to hear from Malcolm that the Commission is bringing in the IEA's work strand, because they really have done a lot of work in understanding what has worked in other contexts and what hasn't worked. And keeping an open, dynamic mind and the ability for the right people to be empowered to act when the technology and science allows them is one of the key lessons learned in this process. So providing clarity over the scope of emissions, I think will become easier if some form of a methane performance standard or a benchmark is enshrined into EU law as a core part of both the methane legislation, but also the forthcoming gas market reform, including in LNG. So with both China and Japan quickly becoming the preferred destinations for globally traded gas, the EU's leverage on importers is continuously narrowing, while its dependence on imports will stay strong until at least 2030. The upstream segment already have pronounced themselves and consider a methane performance standard of 0.2% intensity by 2025 to be feasible. So this should offer impulses and inspiration regarding the strategy for imports. And indeed, what I think would be very helpful to have, and this is an invitation to you all working in the upstream segment among the European oil majors. Many of you have been engaging with the issue and have been putting in place processes and strategies to achieve this 0.2% performance standard. And I think now is the time to also start capturing all these lessons learned into concrete case studies and explaining to people outside your companies, what have you been doing to meet these standards, and perhaps offering cases in terms of practical steps to use to meet these targets. When it comes to the midstream and downstream segments, I think the jury on what an appropriate target for the midstream and downstream segments is still out, as both segments are only at the start of doing measurements. And I was very encouraged to hear from Eva that both segments are quite engaged in the OGMP process and are doing their own measurements already, especially in Germany. But I think it's important to, in the context of legislation, I think it's important to also have the discussion about what appropriate targets for these segments might be. And on a high level, I think when considering targets for the midstream and downstream segments, our view is that in a 2030 context, a blanket greenhouse gas targets, which equalizes the damage of longer term pollutants like CO2 and methane, which is shorter term and more potent, might not be appropriate, as it risks removing ambition and urgency from solving the methane problem. So what we would like to see is, instead of packaging everything together in a kind of broad greenhouse gas target, which can often be very obscure to external stakeholders, we would recommend separating the targets and having a specific methane and CO2 target reported separately, so that each can be managed and verified individually. So while 2030 targets are important, it is perhaps even more important for the industry across segments to set a 2025 target too. And that includes both the midstream and the downstream segments. So I would say that an absolute target is when the data is granular enough to allow for one. Of course, the best possible option is an absolute target, something like 80% lower methane emissions by 2025, for example, because A, it requires actual mitigation work to be demonstrated instead of simply doing accounting work. And B, it forces the companies to establish a current baseline. So I would say the stakeholder collaboration so far has almost been exemplary, and we should continue providing the evidence and the studies and the knowledge in a more systematic way, so that people like Malcolm and many of the policymakers we have today with us will be able to take the ambitious policy decisions that will need us to get everyone to move the needle on this issue. This is an issue that we can solve and that we should be able to solve, because it really is an issue of welfare for the future generations, both in Europe but also globally. And with that, I leave it here to leave the floor for the very many questions that we have. Thank you.
Great, Poppy. Thank you very much for that input. Can I ask all of the panelists to please put on your videos, because we're going to open up to questions from the audience and for discussion amongst the panelists. So as I said earlier, everyone can write their questions in the Q&A box, and we'll try to select a few out of there for discussion by the panelists. So I think given that Malcolm was first up and had a bit of a rest, I think we'll direct a question initially to you first, and I'd like to hear from the other panelists as well. But so the question is that how would the monitoring, verification, reporting mechanism work? And maybe if you could talk a little bit about OGMP 2.0 and perhaps any relationship between what you're doing and that initiative, and various ideas of reconciliation between top-down and bottom-up reporting. Do you have any feeling for how that might evolve?
Well, what we've made clear in the communication that is that what we will be proposing in terms of legislation during the course of the next year will be very much inspired on what has been achieved by OGMP, because we consider in terms of as regards what's been achieved so far by OGMP, this is the standard to be followed. So what we look to be doing in the context of how one proposes EU legislation, we'll be looking at what exactly that amounts to, and the feasibility with regards to translating OGMP 2.0, given that this will be the new norm, into legislation. Hopefully it'll be a case of direct translation of GMP 2.0 into legislation, but maybe it might not be that straightforward, that simple. It's something that we're assessing, that we're looking at right now. And as required by the better regulation principles that we have to adhere to, this means also that we need to look at various alternative options, such as even non-legislative options, in order to make the case for what we've proposed in the communication. So what we propose in the communication is, if you like, what we as the Commission consider to be the way forward and what we should do, but we need to still to do the work and the analysis to convince through an impact assessment that the options that we've proposed are the options that we will follow. In terms of how exactly we will translate that into OGMP into legislation and what the alternatives might be that we will look into, it's too early in the process to be able to give you much in terms of details on that. But what is certainly important, and I think what we've made clear in the communication in terms of reporting the focus, I think it's the first thing we talk about in the communication, is we'd like to push towards higher tier reporting, such that eventually we're not talking about estimations anymore, methane emissions, but actual measurements on the ground. And we have this we have this satellite technology, Copernicus, existing satellite technology that will allow us to have a great deal of emissions on super emitters, on large emissions, but also in due course more information on smaller emission sources. And this will allow, I think this will give us the basis for the verification that we will want eventually this International Methane Observatory to be conducting. How exactly that will fit into the role, the verification role in EU legislation by 2021, given that the observatory has yet to be set up and will take the time to be set up, is not yet completely clear. It's something that we'll have to consider. So perhaps a future role, not an initial role. These are all the various different elements that we are thinking about, and reporting, increasing the tier, the levels of the tier levels of reporting, initially in the energy sector, but also in the waste and agricultural sectors are very much central to what we are trying to do, and that we will try to legislate on.
Great, thank you. Do any of the other panelists want to talk about MRV and top-down versus bottom-up, and how this might be implemented helpfully? Okay, we'll take that as a no. But I've got a question here specifically directed at Poppy. So there's a question about LNG being making markets more attractive for LNG in Europe. Poppy, I think you've seen that question. Do you want to have a go at answering it and let the audience know exactly what it is?
Yes. So it's actually a very hard question, even though it seems very simple. 2 or 3 reasons. The first being that I don't think we can speak of an EU market for LNG. I think some markets in Europe, the Dutch market, I suspect will be attractive for LNG in the very short to medium term, as will probably the French markets, and perhaps other markets in Italy and so on. But I think the question that if we unpack the question, let me just bring this in front of me because it has lots of different angles. So yes, the question is more about, it's not so much about exerting pressure, that rather than stating certain requirements that one has to meet to sell in this market. And it's not more complicated than requirements the EU already sets on cacao or timber and many other commodities that we already kind of have some standards on. Depending on when discussing the attractiveness, I think there's lots of moving elements there, but I expect that in the short term, the EU market will remain one of the premium markets where it will still pay more for the same molecule of gas. Perhaps Japan might take it over on LNG, but obviously this is a very uncertain market in itself. And I was hearing the IEA last week saying that this is the very first year where all investment on LNG capacity has actually frozen. So what this might mean for LNG is generally, the LNG market is generally going into a very uncertain period itself. How do we make our markets more attractive for the LNG exporters is not, I think, the end goal in itself. If we consider the European Green Deal and the national energy and climate plans, but rather how do we reduce CO2 and methane emissions is the goal. And if LNG in those markets that struggle to meet CO2 and methane emissions, I expect that their national regulators and their national ministries will set their own kind of taxes or incentives to make their market attractive, not to all LNG exporters. And I think that's the key. I think those LNG exporters who can credibly prove that they've managed their methane emissions will probably have a higher chance of succeeding in markets like the Dutch markets or the French market or the more liquid kind of Northwest European markets, and certainly Italy as it tries to build up its hydrogen production. Is there a risk that we make the EU too complicated or expensive? I think that's always a very philosophical question around all things relating to the EU. The EU is already more expensive. It still is a premium market, only second to Japan in terms of what the EU is willing to pay for the molecules. So I would say no. If it's too complicated, I think it's a region. The EU is a region of 27 member states. So this was my feedback.
Yeah, there's all good points. And, I've heard of isolated cases of higher prices being paid for gas that has demonstrably lower methane emissions. But I think both Thilo and Eva want to weigh in on this. So first, Eva.
Not on this point, but I was not fast enough when you asked the question about top-down. So to comment on the question on top-down or bottom-up as a DSO, it will be very hard with the top-down at the distribution level. I think we will have a hard time having drones flying around the streets, imagining this here in Munich, it would create a havoc. But also with the satellites, we know that the satellite is very good for large plants, but to find leaks at the level that we have at the distribution level, we probably have to look into other technologies. And this is, I think, what's happening at the OGMP discussion level, that we find the right reconciliation between top down and bottom up for the right level. So for TSOs and DSOs and LNG and the storages. And so there is not one solution for everybody. And I think this is important to find the proper level of technology that we need then.
Thanks, Eva. And Thilo, you wanted to say something on this?
No, I wanted to come back to Poppy's statement on the international trade, because LNG is actually nicely somehow reflecting the international market reality that we have. And I fully agree with Poppy. It should not be a target as such to bring LNG in. It should be a target to have the appropriate natural gas supply into Europe. And I still believe Europe is probably best placed in the world when it comes to import opportunities. We are actually connected to the North Sea, to Russia, to North Africa. So therefore, I actually very much like that we now also bring transparency to the LNG value chain, yeah, with all the things that come with the LNG, because that has also to do with the competition with pipeline gas. With respect to pipeline gas, I would like to add something here, because we always say, how do we actually bring the non-European producers to terms? We should also not forget that some of them are already working on that one. Yeah, we are not the only ones trying to improve systems. One example, Gazprom, they actually are part of the methane guiding principles. So they do also commit themselves to improving the system. And I think if you would take a look at the newer projects that are developed, both in our joint ventures, we have first-hand experience that the joint ventures that we set up in Western Siberia together with Gazprom, they are applying first and high-level standards that we apply elsewhere. So I think it's we should also be respectful to the world around us. Yeah, it's not just us working on that one. And yes, we what we can do as a company, and I said that before, we do actually proactively go to the NOCs, we go to the operators in our fields and exchange on everything. And I think that's the best way forward. And that's why I also like these kind of classes here. And I hope that many people are participating from around the globe, that we are really open. That is the main purpose of the methane guiding principles. We are really willing to share all our experience. We are willing to share that among the participants, but also those companies who might not yet be participating in these ones. And I think that's the way forward, leading by example and bringing the technology out there. But what I wanted to really emphasize, it's not the case that the others are not doing anything in the same direction. It's just one globe and everybody is taking that serious.
Superb. I think that brings us to some interesting points on international cooperation, and I mean, a point which has come up a lot here, which is international markets. So one thing on international cooperation, one question we have in the chat is, what are the key opportunities for cooperation with other major importing markets? Is it possible to have cooperation with regard across all importers? In addition to cooperation, I guess, also with exporting countries and ways in which to ensure that methane emissions are driven down as much as possible from those markets. So first, just to open the floor on that question, would anyone like to have a go on international cooperation and how it's important for the EU's methane strategy?
Nobody wants. I can go for it. As I've said, I think that is something that is getting traction all over the world. Yeah, that's at least my experience. And I've said before that we in Germany have made that significant reduction, and Eva has mentioned that one, and that is actually driven by certain technological things, and that has also happened around the globe. Yeah, so it's really important to see that there is a global trend to the better. We are not yet there. That is the important piece. But I think therefore it's very crucial to be part of projects, to be part of upstream projects, to be part of import projects, to form joint ventures and not leave it just in one hand. Yeah, I think that is the important part where you can influence people. What we also do, we as Wintershall Dea very actively, we have a so-called scientific technical cooperation also with partners. And there we do actually exchange our knowledge that we have on the technological sphere and try to predict what is possible in the coming years. And I think that is also important on the forward-looking to identify the right topics and then implement them together with partners. And I think there's really willingness to do so.
Okay, go ahead, Eva.
Maybe an unusual answer, but if we include more hydrogen, then we lower the methane emissions. So this is also international cooperation. As soon as we have more and more hydrogen injected into the gas grid, be it with blends or pure hydrogen, it is clear that we're going to have a decrease in the methane emissions. So this is one of the important strategies that we have in the TUGA group to work on this.
Great, thank you. Did I see your hand, Poppy? Yes, go for it.
Yes, I just want to take the impulse that Malcolm gave us before, that this is not a job that the Commission in itself can solve. And I think Malcolm invited us all to actually be active and make sure that we create constructive and productive international collaboration. So I would say that if we take a step back, all the major importing regions now have very ambitious net zero emissions. China has a net zero emissions target in 2060, Korea and Japan for 2050. These are very challenging targets. And I think all of those regions, we're all in the same boat where we need to kind of create some radical improvements in the energy system, in the way we consume and produce. And so what I would expect, I've already seen on Twitter, for example, so I know that Malcolm's colleagues are briefing the commissioner to discuss methane in her bilateral. She discussed it with OPEC a couple of weeks ago and with the US. But the point is, we now have to also make it possible that the national foreign ministries also lend their weight and the extent of their diplomatic services to make sure that we can have a proper follow-up, because having just one meeting and kind of agreeing to do something is not really the hard work. The hard work is to build the systems and the continuous dialogue and the continuous engagement to actually get the job done and reduce the emissions.
Thank you very much, Robbie. We're actually kind of out of time here, I'm afraid. We just have 5 minutes left in the session. But I do want to give each panelist an opportunity for a final 1 minute or ideally 45-second summary of your position, and what do you feel are the interesting points for the EU methane strategy coming out of this discussion. So Thilo, you had your hand up, so would you like to go first?
Yeah, no, I wanted to have a brief question, but maybe I can put that in. I think it's really, I mean, we have all agreed that it is crucial to really reduce the methane emissions. And I think we as Wintershall Dea, we take that really seriously and are working on projects. I always say it's needed that you can touch it. Yeah, let's not just talk, but let's do things that we can touch. What I really would find important, and that goes back to the EU Commission, set the right incentives. Yeah, don't impose something, but I think setting the right incentives by, for instance, tax benefits that really gives the incentives to do something different. I think that would be great, and keep on exchanging as much as possible. I think really the exchange via sectors within the industry. I think that's the important thing: learning from each other and sharing.
Perfect, thank you, Eva.
Give us a chance. Give us a chance to reduce the methane emissions, and let's work on it. And I think what we've seen in the last 12 months is a real movement which is happening. And this is why, for me, it's sometimes sad if people say, no, we don't need you anymore, we don't need the distribution. We're just at the beginning of it. And the speed which is taking up is so incredible, and people are getting so ambitious. They are coming up with ideas and say, why do with it, implement this. So I think it's a very positive movement which is happening, but this is nothing you can do in a scratch in 10 seconds. You just need some time, but use this positive movement and increase that also with the biogas storyline, which is also part of the methane strategy, which I think is very, very important.
Super, thank you. Poppy.
I think just to echo what Eva said, looking at how fast things have moved in Europe, I think that's a proof point of a main assumption we had, that when you show the facts to engineers, they are all universally trained to act and go and solve the problems. So I'm personally very encouraged to see the progress the European industry has done. And now we need to do the same thing at the global level and scale up all these small pilots to make sure that we have a system that actually manages methane emissions to near zero.
Great, perfect. And last but not least, back where we started, Malcolm.
I'll use the opportunity in my minute to say that the next steps for us will be, will very much involve interaction, continued interaction with who we have already. I think I never read so many public consultation responses in my life as in the last few months, and I must say it's been very useful and fruitful. And I would say that's the starting point. We'll be consulting you on the Inception impact assessment, the so-called roadmap. Again, there was one for the communication, but there will now be one for legislative proposals. We will have another public consultation during the course of the next year, earlier in the year, on which we'll have targeted, detailed questions, which will help us to make sure that what we deliver by whenever it is in 2021 is something that the co-legislators will look towards and think this makes a great deal of sense. We sign up to it. So the input not only of the industry that have the experience, that have committed already to a great deal of ambition on that particular subject, but also Poppy, organizations like yourselves are very important. It's a very technical subject as well. And so your input, your experiences is key to this. So we welcome it. Continue to interact with us and to give us the information. Sorry.
Great. Perfect, Malcolm. Thank you very much. And apologies to all of you who put questions in the chat we couldn't answer. There was a lot there, but we only got through a few of them. But thank you all to the panelists. Thank you all very much for your input. Much appreciated. And I will now hand back to James to finish it off.
Thank you very much, Adam. Well, that's been an absolutely fantastic discussion. Really very, very interesting. I tend to agree with a lot of the comments that were made that this is actually quite an unusual situation for the European Commission and their strategy, because this is looking beyond the borders. This is an international issue. And it's good to know that this is something that the European Commission at least has the heart and the fight to take to the international level, because I think that's something that's right and something that we in Europe can certainly lead on and certainly can show leadership. And we have great companies like Wintershall Dea and Tuga who have also shown their own ambitions for what they want to do on this topic. And that's the kind of commitment that we need from industry to make sure that we tackle this issue and really deliver a sustainable future for gas. So I'm very enthusiastic about what we've heard today. I think that you can say the industry is really taking its responsibility and doing a lot of work. And indeed, we have our friends in the European Commission and the EDF and others to make sure that we keep on doing the right thing. And I think that this is a good kind of team approach to addressing a global challenge. Now, I'm not going to speak much longer because, to be fair, it's well after 6. And I know everybody's pretty desperate to go and have their lunches, go see their dinners and go see children or whatever. But I must thank everybody. And I'll start with you, Adam. Thanks very much for the moderation today. Really expert moderation. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you there in the hot seat and done a superb job of commanding the discussion. I must thank all the panelists as well. Everybody has contributed in a very, very strong way and really given us a flavor of the challenges that we can expect in the coming year in terms of legislation and the next 5 to 10 years in terms of addressing the issues that come up around methane emissions. I must also thank Wintershall in particular because they are our partner for this event. And I doubt we would have had such a big reach and such a big audience without your help, Thilo, and your team. So very much thanks to them. Thanks to my own team as well in Eurogas. They've done a splendid job as ever on this event. And lastly, but by no means least, the audience. 23 questions, great levels of interaction. Really, really appreciate that you've stayed with us. We've still got well over 200 for these final moments. Shows how important this issue is. I hope you found this useful. I hope you found this interesting and to a certain extent entertaining. The topic is serious, but we do, of course, like to make sure that we deliver this in a way that is accessible and easy for us all to digest. Talking about digestion, let's all go and get some dinner. Thanks again to everybody for coming. It's been a great pleasure. There will be more Eurogas events on this topic. Eurogas will continue to work with the methane guiding principles as mentioned by Thilo. And so do keep an eye on what we're up to because there will be plenty of work to come. Have a great evening, everyone. Thanks again to all the panelists, to Adam.
Thank you.
Keep in touch. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, James. Bye-bye.